Good morning and welcome to our hall here in Poplar. Last week we talked about time from the book of Ecclesiastes. A time for everything. And the writer also said, and the teacher says, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything is meaningless. Meaningless, he said. But we discovered last week that we are not created to be meaningless. We are not created without purpose. This week I want to think about, I want to contradict that verse. There is nothing new under the sun. If the writer were to come here to the East End, as many of you have lived here for 40 years or more, he would see that there are lots of new things. Lots of things have changed. And this lockdown has been a very new experience for lots of us. We've not necessarily enjoyed it. It's not been the best of times for everyone. But it's here. This is the present normal. What does God have to say about this present normal? Well, I'm going to take words from Isaiah. Isaiah 41. And just this one verse. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. Now there's lots of people putting a lot of fear into our minds. They're predicting that we will go into one of the hardest recessions this country has ever known. What that means, I don't know. I don't know whether any of us are going to be better off after this or whether we're all going to be poor. But what does God say? I am the Lord your God, the one who holds you by the right hand and says to you, do not fear. I will help you. But our God is not just a reactive God, a God who's there to help us when we're in trouble. He's a God who is a God of promise, of hope. He's a God who doesn't take the present as the end. He's a God who is always creating within us, creating around us. All the new things that we see around, computers, televisions, aeroplanes, God has given someone the knowledge to do that. So we have a God who is about new things, not just a God of the past. Following that verse where he promised to hold the hand of his people, it tells that, the poor will be thirsty, will be hungry, but do not fear. I will help you. Isaiah talks about rivers flowing into the desert, where the wasteland is begun to come farmland. We can't always live on the mountaintop. We all want to be there. We all want to see the great wonders that are around from a high place. But it's in the valley, following the hard work of the farmer, that the produce is produced. The valley is more fertile. More grows in the valley than it does on the mountaintops. We learn through adversity. We learn through change. We learn through progression. And so much has happened during this lockdown for this world to progress, to move forward. The world might have been on lockdown, but time and development and creativity has not stopped. Our God has not been in lockdown. He's been given wisdom to those who need his wisdom to see us through this crisis. But the promise to us is that he is our God, that he will hold our hand and he will help us, whatever the outcome, whatever the new norm will be. Our God will help us. In Isaiah 43, we have this great verse. It follows a real dialogue that reminds the people of Israel what God did. The God who led you out of Egypt, who brought the armies of Egypt into the sea that was opened up for you to cross and closed upon the armies. That's what I did in the past. But in that verse in chapter 43, it says this, verse 18, forget the former things. You know, so often we want to go back to what was. But God says, forget the former things. Do not dwell in the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. Maybe this was a perfect time for the world to be in lockdown, for the world to stop, for the church to stop, for us to stop here at Poplar Salvation Army, to regroup, to seek God, to think about our future, not to dwell on what has been, but to start to believe on what will be. Start to see that vision. Start to understand what God is doing and what God can do in this place. We are not the oldest Salvation Army in the world because they've just decided to leave us here. We're the oldest Salvation Army in the world because when we've come to that point of distinction, we've been recreated. We've looked to what can be new, what can be done, where we can go as a church. I pray that this time of shutdown, this time of being set aside, might be a time where God is recreating Poplar Salvation Army again. Forget the former things. What we've had up until this point is nothing to what God can do from this point. Last week I said that every single one of us has a purpose. Well, I believe that God has a purpose not only for us, but for this church as a whole. Behold, I do a new thing. Can you feel it? Can you perceive it? Can you see it springing up? Be part of it.